The day it all began, I was sipping lukewarm coffee in my modest one-story house, glancing nervously at the clock on the kitchen wall. My online therapy session with Dr. Severson, appointed by the court, was set to begin in 15 minutes. After weeks of stress, missed appointments, and harsh warnings from my probation officer, I couldn't afford to be late today. That's when I heard the knock, sharp, authoritative, echoing off the walls. My heart gave a little lurch. I wasn't expecting visitors, but I stood and crossed the living room, stepping around cardboard boxes of art supplies that I'd been meaning to organize. As I opened the door, I was greeted by a flinty-eyed woman with coiffed hair, pressed khaki slacks, and an HOA badge clipped to her blazer. Her gaze swept over my front porch with undisguised contempt. "Good morning," she said, though her tone was anything but cordial. "I'm Marjorie Rutledge, head of the Maplewood Fields Homeowners Association. I've noticed an issue with your property." I forced a polite smile, though inside, I felt a small jolt of anxiety. "Issue?" I asked, gripping the doorframe. "I'm not aware of anything. I keep my lawn trimmed, garbage bins stored properly. There's an extension cord winding from your back patio to the side of your garage." She tapped her foot. "We don't allow external power lines or cables that aren't approved by the HOA's landscaping committee. It disrupts the visual harmony." Visual harmony. The phrase alone made me want to sigh in exasperation. "That's just for my pottery wheel," I explained quickly. "I use it outside sometimes to avoid messing up the house. I'm an artist, and well, I'd advise you to remove it immediately. You're in violation of our guidelines. Let this be your formal warning." Her eyes flicked to the digital clock on my microwave, partially visible through the front window. "And I see you're using your electricity in a significant way for midday hours." My eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me." She waved a dismissive hand. "We have rules about unauthorized power usage midday, especially if it leads to spikes on the communal grid. The last thing we need is inflated utility demands." It took every ounce of restraint not to roll my eyes. The idea that my tiny pottery wheel or normal household usage could cause a spike was absurd. But Marjorie's frosty glare told me she meant business. She thrust a folded piece of paper into my hands, likely some excerpt of HOA bylaws, and marched away without waiting for my response. I glanced at the time. My therapy session started in 8 minutes. Great. Another headache. Yet, I resolved to push it aside for now. The therapy was too important. The court had mandated I complete weekly sessions following a minor but impactful legal infraction I'd committed months ago, driving recklessly after an anxiety attack. I was on probation, and any missed therapy sessions could jeopardize my progress. Please read on, because the conflict that began with a simple extension cord soon morphed into a battle that threatened my mental health and my very freedom. In the dim glow of my spare room turned therapy office, I settled in front of my laptop and exhaled slowly. The digital clock read 2:59 p.m. 1 minute to go before my session. A stack of textbooks, a succulent plant, and a half-empty mug of coffee served as my backdrop. I adjusted my webcam and waited for the familiar beep of Dr. Severson's call. My story with court-ordered treatment began 3 months earlier. After a terrifying panic attack led to a reckless driving incident, the judge ruled that I needed consistent mental health support. Therapy wasn't optional. If I missed too many sessions, I risked violating probation. Part of me hated the stigma, having to share my personal demons under court oversight. Yet, another part was grateful. Therapy with Dr. Severson was genuinely helping me manage my anxieties. She taught me techniques to ground myself when panic threatened, and for the first time in years, I felt glimpses of genuine relief. When the video chat icon finally blinked, Dr. Severson's warm, lined face appeared, framed by the softly lit interior of her office. "Hello, Harper," she greeted. "How have you been since our last session?" I rubbed my temples, recalling Marjorie's abrupt visit. "I'm okay, I guess. A bit rattled by some neighborhood drama. But I'm eager to continue our discussion on coping strategies." Dr. Severson offered a sympathetic nod. "We can delve into that. Remember, these sessions are safe spaces. Whether it's panic attacks or an overly strict HOA, let's unpack it." We were only 10 minutes into a surprisingly productive talk when I heard a sharp click from somewhere in my house. The laptop screen flickered, then went black. Every light in my home cut off, and the hum of the air conditioning died mid-breath. "What the?" I muttered, my heart racing. Adrenaline spiked. With the power out, I had no internet. This was the first time in months my session was abruptly severed. I rushed to the breaker box in the garage. All my switches were flipped to the on position, but the main breaker that fed the entire house had been forcibly toggled off. My stomach churned as I recalled how Ms. Benson, Marjorie's name was on the letter, though sometimes I heard neighbors call her Karen in whispers, had been complaining about unapproved midday usage. Could she have? No, that seemed extreme, even for a rigid HOA. But who else would want to kill my power? My workshop was locked. There were no signs of break-ins. My mind spun with possibilities, none of them comforting. I ended up contacting the local electric utility, who confirmed there was no area outage. My neighbor, an elderly man named Russell, saw me fiddling in the garage and ambled over to mention he'd spotted a woman in a blazer standing near my side yard just minutes before the outage. His vague description matched Marjorie's. Cold anger welled up in my chest. She had no idea these therapy sessions weren't just a casual Zoom chat. They were court-ordered. Missing them had serious implications for me. Yet, how could I prove it was her? The uneasy sense that I was being deliberately targeted crept into my thoughts. One missed session might be forgiven by Dr. Severson, but if it happened repeatedly, I could face dire consequences. Power restored, though not without stress, I found a flurry of emails from Dr. Severson. Concerned about my sudden disappearance, she asked if everything was okay. My phone had died during the outage, so I only saw her messages after recharging. I typed a quick response, explaining the power failure, and apologized profusely for vanishing mid-session. Though Dr. Severson seemed understanding, I couldn't shake the worry. She had an obligation to report compliance to the court, and if technical issues persisted or too many sessions got interrupted, it could be interpreted as non-compliance. The flash of memory from the courtroom flickered in my mind, the judge's stern eyes and my own trembling hands as he laid out the rules of my probation. I spent the evening pacing my living room, replaying the day's events. My cozy house, decorated with canvases of abstract art I'd created, felt tainted by a creeping sense of invasion. Ms. Benson, with her clipped tone and endless rulebook, had gone far beyond a simple warning about an extension cord. If she truly had toggled my main breaker, she was crossing a line. But how to prove it? After a restless night, I woke early and decided to approach a few neighbors for more insight. The next morning's sun lit up Maplewood fields in a gentle glow, revealing pristine lawns, carefully pruned hedges, and uniform mailboxes. It was, by all appearances, a pleasant suburban oasis, except for the undercurrent of fear around Ms. Benson's meddling. My first stop was Russell, the friendly widower who had glimpsed a blazer-clad figure at my side yard. His hearing wasn't the best, but he repeated that he'd seen a woman near my property line, though he didn't see her face clearly. She was messing with something, he said, patting his thick glasses. Looked like the power box. Then she walked off quickly. I thanked him, my anger crystallizing. This was sabotage, plain and simple. The next door down, I tried speaking to a young family who just moved in. They admitted Ms. Benson had confronted them over installing a child's swing in the front yard. She's unbelievably strict, the husband whispered. But shutting off power? That's new. My frustration deepened. The more I learned, the more it seemed Ms. Benson reveled in micromanaging everyone's lives. The biggest question remained, why target me so aggressively? At noon, I got a text from Dr. Severson's assistant. The court wanted an update. My abrupt exit from therapy the previous day had caused a minor stir. Dr. Severson had explained it as a technical failure, but the judge's clerk was requesting documentation to ensure I was still in compliance. A wave of anxiety gripped me as I typed back a polite explanation, blaming a neighborhood power glitch. I prayed that would suffice. Yet, a nagging voice inside me whispered, if Ms. Benson tried it once, she might do it again. I needed a strategy, or at least some proof that I wasn't skipping therapy on purpose. 2 days passed without incident, though I felt on edge in my own home, as if Ms. Benson's watchful eyes might be peering through the blinds at any moment. In that window of uneasy calm, I tried to go about my life. I managed my shifts at a local arts and crafts store, carefully juggled phone calls with my probation officer, and did my best to prepare for the next therapy session with Dr. Severson. But the second I started to feel a fraction of normalcy returning, Ms. Benson reappeared. I was hauling groceries from my car one late afternoon when she strode up my driveway, her manicured nails drumming on her clipboard. A forced smile curved her lipstick-coated lips. Good day, she chirped. I wanted to let you know that the HOA will be reviewing your property for compliance next week. We've had concerns about your landscaping, and of course that extension cord fiasco. I frowned, shifting the grocery bag in my arms. My lawn is trimmed. The extension cord is gone. I followed your instructions. Yes, Well, sometimes a deeper review is necessary. She cleared her throat. Additionally, we've noted your unusual midday computer usage. It might be prudent for you to schedule those sorts of activities during off-peak hours. We do have a strict covenant about resource consumption. Her insinuation fueled a spike of anger. The corner of my vision flickered with red, a stress response. With all due respect, Ms. Benson, I pay my utility bills on time. There's no reason I can't use electricity whenever I need to, especially if it's for something important. Ms. Benson's eyes hardened. It's about community harmony. Our association aims to keep Maplewood Fields uniform and cost-efficient. If your usage stands out, you must adapt. Otherwise, there may be consequences. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Is that a threat? She arched an eyebrow, ignoring my question. We'll be in touch. Then, turning on her heel, she sauntered off down the sidewalk, presumably to harass another neighbor. I set my groceries down on the kitchen counter, hands trembling. I no longer doubted she'd shut off my breaker. She was just that brazen, and her approach to enforcement was borderline tyrannical. My next therapy session was in 2 days. I needed a plan to ensure the power wouldn't mysteriously cut out again. Maybe I could set up a backup generator or at least record my property with a camera. Despite the uneasy swirl of thoughts, I forced myself to calm down. Because if Ms. Benson rattled me too much, I risked sinking back into an anxiety spiral that might jeopardize the progress I'd made since the court incident. The night before my scheduled therapy session, I hardly slept. Each squeak of the house settling, each distant car horn, made me jump. My mind conjured images of Ms. Benson sneaking around my yard in the pre-dawn hours, flipping breakers and cutting wires. I knew I was spiraling, letting my fear run amok, but it felt so plausible. By morning, my eyes were bloodshot from lack of rest. Still, I set up my laptop in the designated therapy room, checking the stability of my internet connection. I placed a small camera at the side window, angled discreetly so it would capture anyone approaching the circuit breaker. If Ms. Benson tried anything, I'd have evidence. At 1:55 p.m., I logged in, waiting for Dr. Severson's session link to appear. My hands trembled. Another sabotage attempt could put me in direct violation of my court order if it looked like repeated absences. This time, I was determined to be ready. The session started smoothly. Dr. Severson's reassuring presence filled my screen, her voice a calm anchor. We delved into coping mechanisms for my anxiety, focusing on practical exercises. About 15 minutes in, a beep from my phone signaled that the camera near the garage had detected motion. My chest squeezed. I discreetly checked the feed. Sure enough, the camera showed Ms. Benson in a crisp white blouse, pacing by my side yard. She paused by the breaker box, glancing around as though to ensure no one was watching. My heart pounded so hard I almost missed Dr. Severson's next question. "Harper," came her gentle voice. "Is everything all right?" I swallowed hard. Sorry, can you give me a moment?" Without fully muting, I rushed to my garage, flinging open the door. Ms. Benson was indeed standing there, her hand inches from the box's handle. Startled by my sudden appearance, she jumped back, face twisted with annoyance. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice cracking with adrenaline. She recovered quickly, smoothing her blouse. "Just conducting an inspection to ensure everything meets code. Your property lines." "No, you're trespassing. This is private property. The HOA doesn't have a right to do surprise inspections of my personal breaker." My voice rose, echoing in the confined space. "Step away." Her lips curved in a condescending smirk. "My dear, the association has the right to address any potential threat to the community's well-being. If you're draining excess power, that's an issue. Now, please let me check the equipment." I positioned myself between her and the breaker. The color in my cheeks burned. I could practically feel Dr. Severson's presence on the video call, possibly hearing every heated word. But this was more important than politeness. "This is harassment," I hissed. "You have no grounds, no warrant, no official capacity to mess with my breaker. If you touch it, I'll call the police." For a moment, I feared Ms. Benson might push past me. But the intensity of my glare, and perhaps the threat of law enforcement, made her hesitate. She clutched her clipboard with white-knuckled fingers. "Fine," she snapped. "But this isn't over. We have rules in Maplewood Fields, and you are in violation. Expect a formal complaint in your mailbox." She spun on her heel and stalked away, leaving me shaking from the confrontation. After a few seconds to collect myself, I dashed back to my laptop. Dr. Severson, eyes wide with concern, asked, "Harper, is everything okay?" I could hear raised voices. My shoulders sagged. I'm so sorry. My neighbor's trying to sabotage my power again. I had to stop her. A wave of emotion threatened to choke me. This is insane. She doesn't realize how important these sessions are for my probation. Dr. Severson's face softened. This is troubling. I might need to inform the court of these circumstances so they understand your situation. Would you be comfortable with that? Tears pricked my eyes. Yes, please. I'd rather they know what's going on. I'm not trying to skip therapy, I swear. Her gentle nod was all the reassurance I needed. For the remainder of the session, she guided me through calming techniques. Still, my mind buzzed with the knowledge that Ms. Benson was actively trying to yank away my lifeline, and I refused to let it stand. In the days that followed, Dr. Severson kept her word. She filed a brief report to the court's liaison, explaining how I nearly missed a second session due to my neighbor's interference. The liaison responded with an email expressing sympathy, but also stressing that it was my responsibility to ensure I had a secure environment for therapy. My frustration boiled over. How am I supposed to ensure that when Ms. Benson is so brazen? I mulled over calling the police, but without a direct physical threat or property damage, I worried they might dismiss it as a civil matter. Then I considered consulting a lawyer, but attorneys cost money I didn't really have. My salvation came from an unexpected quarter, a neighbor named Clarissa who lived 2 streets over. One evening, she knocked on my door, a nervous smile on her face. She introduced herself as a longtime Maplewood Fields resident who'd had her own run-ins with Ms. Benson's tyranny. She once tried to fine me for installing solar panels on my roof, Clarissa explained, settling onto my living room couch. I had city permits, everything legit, but she claimed it was unsightly and damaging property values. We ended up in a huge fight. My eyes widened. How did you resolve it? Clarissa tapped her chin. I threatened to file a restraining order if she kept trespassing to inspect my panels. When she realized I wasn't bluffing, she backed down. But she's always searching for the next neighbor to bully. I exhaled shakily. I might have to do something similar. She's interfering with my court-mandated online sessions, like literally trying to shut off my power while I'm on camera with my therapist. Clarissa's eyebrows shot up. That's beyond petty. It's dangerous. You should definitely document everything. Pictures, timestamps, witnesses. If you have proof, you can approach a local judge for an order telling her to keep away from your property. My thoughts raced. That's not a bad idea. My therapist is also aware of the sabotage. Maybe she'd give me a statement. Encouraged by Clarissa's empathy and suggestions, I started compiling a folder of evidence, screenshots from the camera feed, a written timeline of Ms. Benson's visits, emails from Dr. Severson and the court liaison, and a note from Russell, my elderly neighbor, confirming he'd seen Ms. Benson near the breaker box. It felt empowering to gather these details. For too long, I'd let my fear of retribution keep me passive. But Ms. Benson had overstepped in a way that jeopardized my compliance with the law, and by extension, my future. Enough was enough. Flush with determination, I thought about confronting Ms. Benson in front of the entire HOA board. Maybe shining a public light on her actions would rein her in. So when I learned the HOA planned a monthly meeting at the community center, I decided to attend and bring my evidence. The evening of the meeting, I arrived at the polished auditorium to see neighbors milling around, some politely sipping coffee. Ms. Benson sat at a long folding table alongside 4 other board members. She was in her element, flipping through stacks of documents and greeting people with a tight, practiced smile. My stomach knotted at the sight of her, but I reminded myself, I'm here to stand up for my rights. When the meeting began, it was the usual slog of landscaping budgets, playground safety, and holiday decoration guidelines. Finally, they opened the floor for community concerns. Steeling myself, I raised my hand. Yes, Ms. Benson asked, a hint of impatience coloring her tone. The board recognizes Harper Davis. Please keep your remarks within 3 minutes. I approached the microphone, nerves jangling. The bright overhead lights made me squint. I'd like to address repeated trespassing and harassment by Ms. Benson. She has, on multiple occasions, tampered with my home's breaker box, cutting off power while I was in a mandated therapy session. A shocked murmur rippled through the audience. Ms. Benson's eyes flashed, but she stayed silent. I have proof, I continued, lifting a folder. Video footage of her near the box, witness accounts, and a record of how it caused me to miss or nearly miss court-ordered therapy. This behavior is unacceptable, and I'm asking the HOA board to intervene. One of the board members, a balding man named Walter, looked uncomfortable. Ms. Benson, is there any truth to this? That's a serious claim. Ms. Benson let out a tight laugh. I conduct standard property inspections. Perhaps Ms. Davis misunderstood my role or misread a routine check as tampering. Our bylaws allow oversight of electrical usage if it affects the community. My blood boiled. Cutting my power is not oversight. It's sabotage. A woman on the board, her name tag reading Maria Torres, spoke gently. Ms. Benson, do the bylaws actually permit physically toggling a residence breaker? That seems extreme. Ms. Benson's composure wavered for a split second before she plastered on a patronizing smile. We can't confirm Ms. Davis's allegations. If she has video, I'd like to see the entire context. I held up a thumb drive. Here it is. Walter cleared his throat. We'll review the footage, Ms. Davis. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Sensing Ms. Benson was about to retort, I stared her down. I also intend to seek legal recourse if this continues. I have a right to my power and my therapy sessions without interference. With that, I stepped away from the mic. The hush in the room felt electric. Ms. Benson's face had gone rigid, but the board members looked uneasy, as if not entirely sure how to handle the confrontation. My pulse raced, yet I left the community center with a renewed sense of purpose. I'd exposed her in front of neighbors. She couldn't keep pretending her actions were trivial or justified. In the days that followed the HOA meeting, a swirl of rumors circulated through Maplewood Fields. Some neighbors, previously oblivious to Ms. Benson's underhanded tactics, began questioning her authority. Others, especially her loyal circle, whispered that I was blowing things out of proportion, making wild accusations. It felt like the neighborhood was taking sides. I received an email from Walter, the balding board member, acknowledging they'd reviewed my footage. He wrote that while it was concerning, Ms. Benson insisted she never actually touched the breaker. She claimed she was just inspecting. He ended by saying the board would discuss the matter further, but encouraged me to resolve it amicably with Ms. Benson. My gut twisted in frustration. She was evading accountability yet again. Meanwhile, Dr. Severson had to send another update to the court when my anxiety flared so badly that I nearly canceled a session. Though I did attend, it was overshadowed by my constant fear that the power might cut out again. She recommended I reach out to a local legal aid service for guidance. As if I needed another push, I got a letter in my mailbox, a notice from Ms. Benson herself, plastered with official HOA letterhead. It claimed I was in violation for installing an unauthorized camera facing a common area. That camera was on my private property, and it only recorded my breaker box in a slice of the yard near my side fence. I see that. She was actively retaliating by weaponizing the HOA rules. One evening, feeling the strain mount, I retreated to my pottery wheel in the backyard. Shaping clay had always been my therapy before therapy, an outlet to calm my anxious mind. But as I sank my hands into the wet clay, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting Ms. Benson to appear. Sure enough, about an hour later, I heard footsteps on the grass. My heart lurched, but I refused to stand down. This was my yard, after all. I turned to find Ms. Benson's silhouette by the fence. "Must you operate that contraption so late?" she called over the fence, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's nearly 9. The noise might disturb neighbors." "It's a quiet electric wheel." I shot back, surprised at my own boldness. "There's no noise." She sniffed. "Regardless, the association encourages quiet hours starting at 8:30. I'd advise you to comply." I stood, clay smeared on my arms, blood rushing in my ears. "If you come near my breaker again, I will file harassment charges. I have cameras now, and I have a right to attend therapy. This is non-negotiable." Ms. Benson's eyes narrowed in the faint yard light. "Do you really want to escalate a neighborly dispute to the authorities? Think carefully." Her threat was chilling, but I refused to cower. "I'm done being intimidated." Without another word, she turned and disappeared behind the fence. My hands trembled with lingering adrenaline as I resumed molding the clay, my mind churning with defiance. This war she started was about more than power usage. It was about my right to heal, to comply with the court's requirements, and to live peacefully. Days later, the final straw fell. It was a muggy Tuesday afternoon, and I had a crucial therapy session scheduled for 2 p.m. Dr. Severson had arranged for my probation officer to attend the last 5 minutes to confirm my compliance. Missing this session wasn't an option. I triple-checked everything. Camera angled at the breaker, backup hotspot for internet if the power went out, phone fully charged. I even prepared a statement explaining that I'd done all I could to ensure connectivity. At exactly 1:58 p.m., Ms. Benson showed up outside my gate, looking irritated. I spotted her on the camera feed. She stood there for a moment, then turned to walk around my property's perimeter. My pulse hammered. Why is she here now? 1:59 p.m. I forced my focus on the laptop, Dr. Severson's session link open. My probation officer planned to join at 2:25 p.m. The tension made me dizzy, but I tried to steady my breathing. A beep signaled Dr. Severson's arrival. Her face appeared, along with a second window for the probation officer. "Hello, Harper," Dr. Severson greeted. "We're on time today. How are you feeling?" Before I could respond, the lights flickered. My screen momentarily glitched, then stabilized. My heart leapt into my throat. I glanced at the camera feed on my phone. Ms. Benson was at the breaker box, messing with something. "Dr. Severson," I choked out. "I'm so sorry, but my neighbor's tampering with the power again." Blink. The laptop went black. The hum of the air conditioner cut off. A second later, my phone lost its Wi-Fi connection, though it remained on cellular data. I cursed under my breath, sprinting to the garage. As I suspected, the main breaker switch had been violently flipped again. I flicked it back, feeling a surge of panic. But this time, Ms. Benson was still there, her face contorted with fury. She tried to push past me to flip it once more. We grappled for the switch, neither willing to yield. "Stop," I yelled, my voice cracking. "You're interfering with my therapy session and my probation. This is illegal." She yanked her hand free, face twisted. "You have no right to use so much power midday. I told you about the rules. If you can't follow them, you shouldn't live here." A red haze clouded my vision. "I'm calling the police," I seethed, stepping back to dial on my phone's cellular network. "I have you on camera doing this. You realize you could ruin my life." She let out a bitter scoff. "Don't be dramatic." But I was already speaking to the dispatcher, breathless. "I'm at 145 Juniper Drive. My neighbor is trespassing and cutting off my power, interfering with a court-ordered therapy session. I need assistance." Her eyes widened. She turned on her heel and marched away, but the damage was done. I flipped the breaker on again and ran to my laptop, praying the session would reconnect. By the time I got the router up, Dr. Severson and the probation officer were gone. My phone's notifications showed missed calls. My entire future might have crumbled in those few minutes. Yet, strangely, a sense of grim resolve settled over me. Ms. Benson had gone too far this time, leaving behind evidence not only on my camera but also in my frantic 911 call. There was no walking away from this without a serious showdown. It took the police about 15 minutes to respond. When they pulled up in their squad car, lights silently swirling, Ms. Benson was out on the sidewalk, arms folded like she was waiting to scold them. I stood in my driveway, trying to appear calm despite my rattled nerves. 2 officers approached. One, Officer King, took my statement first. I described how Ms. Benson had trespassed on my property and flipped the breaker, causing me to lose my online session. I pointed to the camera that presumably caught it all. Ms. Benson tried to interject with her version of events, claiming I was violating HOA guidelines and that she was authorized to ensure compliance. But Officer King asked her to wait her turn. After hearing me out, they turned to Ms. Benson. She repeated her claims that the HOA gave her inspection rights, that I was using excessive power, and that my camera was spying on common areas. The officers exchanged a look. Then Officer King politely asked if she had any written documentation from the HOA that authorized flipping breakers or cutting off power. She hesitated, rummaging through her clipboard. "Well, not specifically. But the bylaws allow the board to correct issues that threaten the neighborhood." A second officer, Officer Bradley, frowned. "Ma'am, interfering with someone's electrical system can be considered vandalism or harassment, especially if it's repeated and documented." Ms. Benson bristled. "I'm only doing my duty. Our neighborhood can't have individuals who disregard rules." Ms. Davis was warned about unauthorized midday electricity usage. There's no such law in the state or city restricting midday electricity usage in a private residence, Officer King cut in. That's not enforceable by an HOA to the point of forcibly shutting off power. Ms. Benson's cheeks flushed. She sputtered a retort that trailed off into silence when she realized how futile it sounded. Officer Bradley turned back to me. Do you have video? I nodded. Yes, from this camera. It caught her toggling the breaker. They escorted me inside, where I replayed the footage on my phone. The image was clear enough. Ms. Benson by the breaker, her hand grasping the handle. I paused the clip just as I burst into view. That was proof enough that she'd touched it. Officer King nodded grimly. That's sufficient evidence for a harassment report, Ms. Davis. If you want to press charges, we'll file the paperwork. A swirl of relief and apprehension churned in my gut. Pressing charges could escalate an already ugly situation, but Ms. Benson was jeopardizing my legal compliance and mental health. I felt no other choice. Yes, I'd like to. They led me outside. Ms. Benson was still standing by the curb, arms folded, scowling. The officers approached her calmly, explaining the seriousness of her actions. Her face went ashen when she realized I wasn't backing down. You can't do this, she snapped, though her voice trembled. I'm the HOA representative. I have authority here. Officer Bradley gave her a measured look. That authority does not include tampering with private property or potentially endangering someone's legal obligations. In the end, they issued her a citation for harassment. It wasn't a full arrest, but it meant she'd have a mandatory court date. She raged about false accusations and threatened to call her own attorney, but the police were unimpressed. Once they left, Ms. Benson disappeared into her house, slamming the door with enough force to rattle window panes. My hand shook as I locked up for the night, but a sense of vindication battled the anxiety. Maybe, just maybe, this would force Ms. Benson to back off. If not, I was prepared to escalate further. Enough was enough. 2 days later, I had an emergency phone call with my probation officer and Dr. Severson. They explained that my missed session, particularly the portion involving the officer, raised flags at the courthouse. However, once Dr. Severson detailed Ms. Benson's sabotage, the judge requested more information. The judge also hinted at the possibility of issuing a protective order if Ms. Benson's actions endangered my compliance. My heart fluttered with cautious hope. A protective order would prohibit Ms. Benson from interfering with my therapy or stepping onto my property uninvited. That might give me the peace of mind I desperately needed. As the legal gears turned, Ms. Benson doubled down. She flooded me with HOA notices alleging everything from violations of fence height to improper color scheme of blinds. It was laughable, yet deeply stressful. She was clearly in panic mode, trying to bury me in petty infractions. Clarissa, my supportive neighbor, insisted I maintain a calm front. She's trying to bait you into a meltdown, she warned. Stay focused on the real issue. She sabotaged your therapy. Keep your documentation in order. The court won't care about the color of your blinds. Sure enough, about a week after the police citation, I got a summons to appear before the local magistrate for a hearing about a possible restraining order. Ms. Benson had also requested a hearing to contest the harassment charge. Tension spiked in my chest. Would the court see the truth that Ms. Benson's behavior was malicious and not just some misunderstanding? My therapy sessions continued, albeit with heightened security. I set up multiple cameras, a backup generator, and a friend who'd agreed to be on standby in case Ms. Benson tried anything else. Remarkably, she kept her distance. Perhaps the police citation rattled her. Or maybe she was saving her energy for the courtroom showdown. When the day of the hearing arrived, I felt nauseous with nerves. The local courthouse was a modest brick building, its interior humming with the drone of fluorescent lights. I sat on a bench outside the courtroom, wearing a plain blouse and slacks, clutching my folder of evidence. Ms. Benson entered with her lawyer, an older man in a crisp suit who shot me a dismissive glance. She, of course, was dressed impeccably, her posture rigid. My own attorney was a pro bono legal aid worker named Marion, who had quickly grasped the essence of the case. She squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. Remember, Marion murmured, the footage is strong evidence. Your therapist's statement and the probation officer's account both confirm how critical your sessions are. We have a very solid basis for requesting a protective order. I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. This was it. The final confrontation that would decide my immediate future. The hearing itself was tense, almost surreal. We presented our evidence. The video clip, Dr. Severson's letter emphasizing that I needed uninterrupted online sessions for compliance, and a statement from my probation officer verifying I'd lost connection during a crucial check-in. Ms. Benson's lawyer tried to argue that HOA bylaws gave her client the right to ensure communal well-being, painting me as a troublemaker with questionable mental stability, since I was, after all, in mandated therapy. He suggested Ms. Benson only flicked the breaker to inspect a potential safety hazard. But the judge, her brow furrowed, wasn't swayed by that defense. "This is a clear case of harassment," the judge said, voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. Ms. Benson intentionally disrupted Ms. Davis's power, knowing it would interfere with a legally mandated therapy session. That extends beyond normal HOA oversight. I noticed Ms. Benson's face blanch as the judge continued. Court-ordered therapy is not optional. Hindering Ms. Davis's treatment, and by extension, her compliance with probation, constitutes serious interference. Ms. Benson made a strangled noise as the judge flipped through some documents. Thus, the judge concluded, I'm granting a restraining order to protect Ms. Davis's right to unimpeded therapy sessions. Ms. Benson is forbidden from entering Ms. Davis's property or tampering with her utilities without explicit, court-approved cause. Violations of this order will result in immediate legal consequences. Furthermore, Ms. Benson, you are liable for any fines associated with the disruption of these mandated sessions. Marion whispered, We did it, gripping my arm in triumph. Tears pricked my eyes. The relief was overwhelming. Not only did this protect me from further sabotage, but it sent a message that Ms. Benson's tyranny had legal limits. Outside the courtroom, Ms. Benson glared at me, her face set in a mask of resentment. She said nothing, though, clearly rattled by the judge's ruling. Her lawyer guided her away. I stared after her, heart still hammering, but with a sense of victory blossoming in my chest. Thank you for staying with me until the end. After weeks of fear, sabotage, and the looming threat of violating my court order, justice was served. The restraining order promised to be a shield against further harassment, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly safe in my own home. In the following days, Ms. Benson's vendetta cooled. She avoided me entirely, likely worried that even a hint of interference could land her behind bars. The other HOA members, perhaps embarrassed by her actions, quietly backed off any petty complaints. My therapy sessions continued without a single glitch. Though I still had to finish out my probation, I did so with renewed confidence. With Ms. Benson's sabotage neutralized, I was free to focus on healing, forging a calmer, more balanced path forward. And as I sat at my pottery wheel one peaceful evening, shaping clay under a golden sunset, I felt a profound sense of closure. Sometimes, it takes standing up against the most relentless adversary to reclaim your right to be well.